What exactly determines whether a job is hard to play? It is indeed a lot of things, and some things affect some players more than others, and sometimes what content you do can also matter in regards to which job is the hardest. Now, to help me answer the question of which mage is the hardest, I sent out a poll to ask all of you. A lot of you did vote, and while there were some smaller surprises, the spread was close to what I anticipated. Now, you may have already peeked at the video length or even the chapters and noticed that multiple jobs are up for debate, and indeed, we will be talking about what could make each job feel difficult, ranging between many different skill levels, all the way from casual to hardcore optimization, trying to squeeze every single point of damage possible. We will be talking about the jobs in order from easiest to hardest as well. Also, some of you might be saying, what's the point? Dawntrail is coming real soon anyway. And the point is exactly to see if these jobs become easier with Dawntrail. And with that, let's get started. For each job, we will be talking about the general difficulties and challenges of the job, the difficulty in the leveling experience, the difficulty in a more casual setting where at most you might try to optimize around your own cooldowns, and the difficulty in a coordinated raid group setting where we try to see how much you can optimize and how hard that would be when coordinating with the entire team. For the easiest job, with very few votes, we of course have Black Mage. I'm just kidding. Probably unsurprisingly, we have Summoner. What can make this job difficult is that the job is not very well explained in its tooltips, especially so at lower levels, and many of the tooltips can be like an avalanche of words, and even then, still leaves something out. This causes the job to be much more easily learned by simply trying stuff out, which can then make it difficult to ascertain which attacks are better and what not, if all that information is hidden away in those massive tooltips. Naturally, even at max level, the rotation involves eventually using everything, so this mainly causes trouble in regards to the order. Or what? Supposedly, for a lot of comedy geniuses in the comments of the poll, Summoner's also the hardest of the mages because they, let's see, fall asleep because it's so easy. Wow. Anyway, leveling Summoner can be one of the weirdest jobs to experience in the game. The gem attacks, Ruby, Topaz and Emerald Ruin, Outburst and Tri-Disaster, do not exist in your actions and traits. So, you can only view what they actually do in the 30-second time frame where you have the appropriate attunement. And while the Precious Brilliance outbursts and Tri-Disasters consistently do more potency per second than the regular versions, the Gemshine Ruins are often more like instant alternatives to the regular Ruin, causing optimization to get really weird. Topaz Ruin is only better damage-wise than a regular Ruin if you are actively auto-attacking in between attacks due to how auto-attacks get delayed by cast times. Emerald Ruin is the same, but due to it not being affected by spell speed, if you get too much of that, Emerald Ruin can actually turn around and become a DPS loss to use at all. And let's not forget that at level 45 to 49, Summon Garuda only does 100 potency on single target, making that whole part of your rotation possibly a DPS loss. Add to this how before you get Dreadworm Trance, Ether Charge just boosts your ruins by 50 potency per cast, which sounds great on paper, but since Ether Charge costs a GCD, it costs a full ruin cast to use. And you need to swift cast the 6th ruin to fit it inside the buff window. This becomes quite awkward once we realize that this peaks as a 300 potency gain, but starts as a 240, 270 and 300 potency loss when Ether Charge is used. This damage is only really recouped once you use Ifrit, or if mobility was actually required, for example. Still, this means that even if you read the tooltips of Summoner, you might actually be left dumbfounded as to what you're actually supposed to do with it. Once Dreadworm Trance is learned, one problem is removed, and later, once the Gem Rights are learned, the other problem is also removed, and the job starts to make a lot more sense, and ultimately fills out GCDs so much that Rune 3 is at most used once per minute. To optimize for a casual level where you mainly focus on your own kit, Summoner comes packaged with a 2-minute raid buff, which means optimizing for yourself can be similar to optimizing for the raid. Optimally, you want to fit the strongest attacks you have in this buff window, which has made Titan first, into a somewhat unintuitive combo of Garuda and Ruin 4 the prevailing optimal strategy for most circumstances. However, due to the perception that Summoner is so easy, it is actually a very common sight to see Summoners just do Ifrit, then Titan, then Garuda, then Ruin 4, without really thinking about the greater whole. Naturally, the key optimizations a Summoner can do on a fight-per-fight basis is planning Ifrit at points where standing still or being in melee range is okay, while still trying to get the best burst possible. Once we expand to look at optimizing around a coordinated raid team, not much changes for Summoner. You would want to use Searing Light exactly on cooldown after the opener, and where in casual situations it might be more common to simply finish each primal before going back to the demis, or even just skipping primals to go directly to demis. In a coordinated raid, if anything causes you to lose GCDs at all, it is better to speedrun the primals. Do however many casts you can and then move on to the next primal, as the act of summoning each primal is a lot of damage in its own right. Similar to the more casual perspective, planning Ifrit around each fight is one of the biggest parts of optimizing Summoner, which isn't that much, but it is more than nothing. For the middle of the pack, with actually only slightly more votes than Summoner, we have Red Mage. For many, the two things that make Red Mage difficult to pick up is, first, that it starts at level 50, meaning there are a lot of buttons to learn to understand. Second, the whole dual casting system, which isn't that well explained when it really comes to it. You simply have shorter cast time spells that are more convenient for accessing dual cast, which you then spend on the longer cast spells. But that might not be obvious, and surprisingly often leads to the presence of the ultra-slow mage, which ignores the faster spells in favor of using more slower spells. Don't do that, by the way. Don't. Normally, a way to overcome the problem of being given a ton of buttons all at once is to do lower level content to get acquainted with the tooltips one part at a time. However, Red Mage's toolkit does not actually make much sense at lower level, where you can run into problems such as only having one of the two fast AoE spells, missing parts of your melee combo, not having your proc spells or only having one of them. These problems can make the rotation very unbalanced and just make things even more confusing. This all combines to give Red Mage a surprisingly high barrier to entry. Leveling Red Mage once this initial barrier to entry has been overcome gets a lot more manageable though, as for the most part, the job simply gets a few holes in the kit filled out, and then it just keeps building on the same idea. Longer melee combos, a button to instantly access the melee combo, a heal, a raise, and of course an extra OGCD to accompany the first one. Reprise also serves as both a way to vent mana, why would you? And as an option to use when you have to move and have nothing else left, which awkwardly can make Reprise a kind of trap button, as it is rarely ever something you'd want to use. All this combines to make the hardest part about leveling Red Mage actually understanding it initially when picked up. For the more casual, personal optimization at max level, the key thing that will mostly come up is making sure to melee combo when your own raid buff, Embolden, is available, and to use Flesh and Contra 6 exactly on cooldown, which, granted, can at times be a challenge with the design of Red Mage, leading to tricks like GCD displacement, where you use tools like Acceleration or Swift Cast to use a single spell instead of a pair, in case your dual casting has been adjusted away from naturally aligning with these OGCDs. Saving a melee combo for when movement comes up in a fight is also something worth learning that, compared to the GCD displacement, is not nearly as complex. Just don't smash that combo button immediately when it lights up. And for raid coordinated optimization, getting used to precasting a long spell in the pull timer is something minor that the more casual approach often simply won't be allowed to use. The tank isn't going to wait to align with you over Thundercast. And making sure Embolden and even Manification is used in a way that aligns with raid buffs can be a mild challenge. When coordinating with raid buffs, sometimes you can even align your melee combos such that the raid buff window starts when you begin the latter half of the melee combo with the magic burst. And with enough mana prepared, that can lead into another full melee combo also fitting in 20-second buffs like your own Embolden. This kind of trick is a lot about knowing exactly how much in advance you need to start the combo before buffs come out, instead of reacting when the buffs actually come out, which can be difficult. Another part of this trick is also that, as the melee combo serves as the most mobile part of the red mage rotation, not all fights allow you to stockpile that much movement. And so, knowing fights and when you can get away with a trick like this safely can also be a big part of mastering red mage. And finally, for the hardest mage, with nearly 9 times more votes than second place, we have Black Mage. Interestingly, the 3 main components that cause Black Mage to be so hard for a lot of players fit neatly in each of the 3 categories: leveling, casual optimization, and raid coordinated optimization. It is partly about the strictness of the state switches on the job, the weirdness of playing around MP ticks, the severe lack of mobility compared to a lot of other jobs, how much the rotation changes as you level up, and of course, the free-form, yet somehow still strict rotation at higher levels. Oh yeah, also, we had a few comedy geniuses in the comments giving a similar opinion to Black Mage as others gave to Summoner. It is the hardest because it is so boring I fall asleep. When leveling Black Mage, the job reinvents itself multiple times. From level 1 to 27, you maintain Thunder and spam Fire 1 until dry, then Transpose, Blizzard until full, and then start over. At level 28, Thundercloud is introduced, and suddenly you have more mobility than just Scathe. Yet, this Thundercloud is so strong that it should be used whenever it is available. Then at level 35, the whole transposing part is replaced with using Fire 3 and Blizzard 3, and even Fire 2 and Blizzard 2 to switch states instead, making Transpose a button you can click out of combat mostly. Then at level 42, Firestarter adds another proc to click whenever the button lights up, causing Black Mage to have this very stiff rotation that is randomly interrupted by incredibly free movement whenever Thundercloud and Firestarter deems you worthy of a proc. This rotation is built upon all the way to level 59, with even Blizzard 4 just giving you more Fire 1s to maintain the rotation with. And then at level 60, all that stuff about using procs when you get them, forget about it again. Now Fire 4 is the new hotness, both figuratively and literally. And after that point, this new Fire 4-centric rotation is built upon all the way to level 90, but is also more similar to the level 1 to 27 rotation, wherein you don't feel very mobile. Yet, it's also unique in its own way. Since Fire 4 does not refresh Astral Fire, you have a very strict system of having just enough MP for 6 Fire 4s and 1 Fire 1, and this also gives you just enough time to cast all that. And with such a strict timer, having to move for boss mechanics at all can be a massive problem and a hindrance, making Black Mage's awkward mobility a huge part of its difficulty. Yes, the job has plenty of movement with Swift Cast, Triple Cast, Thunderclouds, Firestarters, and Polyglots. But most of these things can be used for damage reasons, and used well, they typically also need to be scheduled in advance. And if you're still learning the job, or the fight, that just isn't happening. For the casual optimization at max level, even something like choosing your gear can be complicated because, somewhat uniquely, Black Mage has the freedom to choose between a super spell speed heavy build and a much slower crit centric build. With the spell speed one offering more flexibility in that you have much more time in each Astral Fire state to do what you want to do, and sneaking in attacks before mechanic resolves can be easier as you may feel less locked down due to the shorter cast times. While the slower crit-centric build leads to longer cast times with bigger payoff, which also makes the limited movement options like triple cast feel more impactful since they last longer in a way, allowing you to move further. Often, in a more casual setting, going with the speed-centric build can be preferred due to the reliance on transpose lines for the slower style. This means that the casual optimization is mostly about using tools as you have them, not sitting on 2 triple casts, sharp cast when you have it, don't sit on full polyglots, use ley lines when you can, and then maintain Thunder. Use Ice Paradox and Blizzard 4 when you visit Ice and get both 6 Fire 4s and a Despair in each Astral Fire state. Try to use Mana Font as you have it for another Fire 4 and a Despair. And sometimes, a simpler transpose line may come about like the classic AF1 F3P standard. When it comes to raid-coordinated Black Mage, however, things can get a lot more hectic. Ley lines should be coming out aligned with raid buffs, and optimally you want to be sure to land just so that you can use all your strongest spells like Xenoglossy, Despair, preferably 2 of them, and a lot of Fire Force during the height of the raid buffs. This can require specific transpose lines to simply make sure you are in the right spot when the raid buffs come out. But given that Xenoglossy and triple casts can be part of this burst, it can also mean you may need to find ways to not rely on these as much in the grander scheme of fights, if at all possible. Sometimes it just isn't possible, similar to Red Mage's melee combo situation. However, the thing is that transpose lines isn't just 1 or 2 more things to learn. It is like a whole thesis of optimization, where indeed many of the tricks are heavily situational. But knowing which situation calls for which line is exactly what makes it so difficult. Unfortunately, although fortunate for some, I suppose, it sounds like it is very possible that transpose lines will no longer be much of a thing come Dawntrail. So before we round up, there are a few factors that I do recognize also play into a ranking of difficulty of jobs. Naturally, players that main a given job typically find that job a lot easier to play. Meaning, for example, that people that never played Summoner might actually be inclined to say Summoner's really hard. Similarly, Black Mage mains would be less likely to say that Black Mage was hardest. Another factor is that in a poll like this, some people might just vote on whatever they believe is hardest, and Black Mage is widely known to be insanely difficult, which can further inflate their numbers. Such a poll also gathers results from all skill levels, from new players to veterans, from hyper-casuals to hardcore Savage Raiders. Anyone could have voted. And finally, there's of course also players that vote randomly just for the sake of it, or vote based on something other than actual difficulty, which can sometimes skew the results a bit. However, I do feel that the jobs did get ranked in a way that makes sense with the things we know would make a job difficult. Now, to summarize. Summoner's difficulty is heavily focused on the nonsensicalness of its tools during its leveling, and the sheer size of their tooltips, making it quite overwhelming if you try to learn it by reading rather than just clicking buttons. The rather small amount of optimization available to them at max level can also make it very easy to miss what is worth doing. Red Mage's difficulty is also heavily focused on initially picking up the job, and then leans over into planning melee combos and GCD displacement for Flesh and Contra Sixt. Black Mage's difficulty also is heavily emphasized by how much its rotation changes and evolves as you level up, but then also planning around boss fights, which you may or may not know in advance. And finally, aligning your rotation with burst windows when optimizing, making use of transpose lines, F for those, which can massively increase the difficulty of mastering the job as well, and can even, at times, be necessary to attain the necessary mobility for a boss fight. I admit that I probably may have forgotten details, or maybe have even skipped quietly over something important in my analysis in this video, so if you have anything to add about the difficulty or ease of any of the jobs, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before Stormblood, many actions you might have expected to have some sort of secondary effect actually had one. For example, Black Mage's Blizzard 1 applied a heavy debuff to slow the movement of the target. Before Endwalker, Blizzard 2 was centered on the Black Mage, and before Shadowbringers, it also applied a bind effect to enemies hit, and indeed, before Stormblood, it was a cross-class action, meaning summoners and all healers also had access to it, if they so desired. Although the Umbral Ice part was of course exclusive to Black Mage and Thaumaturge.